Okay. I attended my first TEDxAUBG in the spring of 2023. I distinctly remember the then student speaker coming on stage, turning to the public and asking, "What three-letter word determines whether we perceive ourselves as successful in life?" I remember it because without missing a beat, I turned to my neighbor and said, "GPA." It wasn't until much later that I realized that rather than a sign for my incredible wittiness, this comment was a terrifying manifestation of a propagated, troubling educational value system. Because you see, for the past 13 years of my life, what I had been taught was an unhealthy obsession with academic achievement. On a personal note, that resulted in a somewhat academic weapon, which now, at the verge of losing the student label she's been tailored for, is kind of stranded. On a global scale, we see a loss of basic skills, as indicated by the latest PISA results for education. We see a disinterest in education, as shown by the European Training and Monitor report from 2025, which says that over half of the students in Bulgaria are late for classes, 12% are missing for significant points in time, and 40% cite boredom as the main reason for their absenteeism. We see dissociation with education around Europe as a whole, as indicated by research done in 2024, which states that 42.6% of the 15 to 34-year-olds have left education at least once, citing reasons such as interest and difficulty in their educational program. We live in an increasingly complicated society where truth gives into persuasion, trust gives into suspicion, resolve relinquishes to idleness. We need Europe to be both well-educated and skilled and actively engaged in society, the monitor opens. This begins with having our education and training system fit for purpose. What does fit for purpose mean, right? How does purpose coincide with student competence? How does it account for student engagement? How does it ensure student welfare? I'd argue through a holistic approach, which targets the development of the entire person with the use of their social context. Today, I'll be taking you through 3 examples of holistic education, backed up by the Welfare Educational Program proposed by the Wellbeing Research Center at Oxford in collaboration with the International Baccalaureate Organization. Those examples I'll use to support my claim as to what Europe has to do to achieve its educational goals. Let's first define what the well-being framework is. The well-being framework is a student's subjective perspective on school life satisfaction, which informs student policies and changes in educational reform. Contrary to possible belief, it's not about catering to every student's needs. Any cheeky student can walk up to you and say, "I don't need to know how to find sources and cite them because AI can do it for me." But it's necessary knowledge. There are basic skills that we need for social functioning, among which the European Commission cites reading, numeracy, science, digital, and citizenship skills. I'd argue reading there, too. That said, acquiring them doesn't need to be a pain. Studying them through graded homework or tests often breeds anxiety, hatred, fear, and then the ultimate death to learning, apathy. Fixing that does not depend on lowering requirements or adding more homework or involving the parents. It depends on the students wanting to do the work out of their own volition. It depends on student agency, something my 10th grade literature teacher was a profound champion of. This is how he did it for us. We were studying The Great Gatsby, and we had to complete a group project on the end of it. Anything remotely related to the book were the assignment parameters. Naturally, my group and I decided to do a 20-minute self-animated video on the Irish independence movement. But what was unique about the experience, other than the fact that by the age of 16, I had acquired the basics needed to apply for a grant for a proposal of my own choosing, was that doing it correctly meant that we were doing draft after draft of the same writing. Why? Because there was someone on the other side who was willing to look through our work, draft after draft, until we were satisfied with the result. We were the one determining the lesson plan. We were the ones choosing the benchmarks. We owned the process. Okay, you can say that's easy to do when you're the one choosing the project you're working on. At some point, we have to sit down and study what my sister defines as the absolutely irrelevant for life sine and cosine identities. Have you ever thought about how clinically we perceive education? Biology, physics, literature even, we label as subjects, as if we can grab a scalpel and dissect them into pieces. We teach them from a course book or presentation which literally flattens the content out. And because of our lowered attention span, we've made those very succinct, which in science means, here's all the formulas, the words, and the big facts. Deal with it on your own. Think about, look at this. This is my textbook from 12th grade. Think about the spaces that we learn them in as well. Separate classrooms, locked doors, thick walls, pretty much in a box. But you and I both know that life, if ever, never works this way. I walk out of school and enter a bus, and I'm already knee-deep in a pool of considerations. Here I am, in a vehicle, which is a work of engineering genius, surrounded by people of different demographics, who some of them are coughing, which raises the question of, should I be wearing a mask? In one single action, I've combined 5 educational disciplines. Renan, the main character of Thinking About Numbers, which is a course book teaching arithmetics through a story about Filipino students learning arithmetics, goes a step further. He ponders, why is there a difference between the number of seats, passengers, and tickets to his bus to school? He asks, is it fair that the bus company promises a space for those passengers but makes them stand on the roof? Thinking About Numbers is one of the many educational texts produced by the Rui Institute associated with the Baha'i community, a global society of the Baha'i faith, the youth educational system of which champions community building and socioeconomic development. The texts that they use are kind of conversation-like and talk about how maths is involved in justice or statistics in action. For the Baha'i, education is not simply the acquisition of knowledge and the development of skills, but also the development of vast and powerful potentialities inherent in the very nature of human beings. It is, essentially, about using academics as a stepping stone to being a good person. It takes the student out of those walls and puts them into context. It uses the oldest form of teaching, storytelling, which is evolutionarily engraved in us through fables, which makes it for a more natural way of learning. It puts the student into the context of realities globally, which increases their general education and also makes them notice the problems we face as a humanity. This not only makes student work a lot more tangible, it also makes it meaningful, because it teaches us a network of knowledge, of dependencies. It makes us notice the domino effect that our actions produce. It makes us more conscious and more able to be tolerant, to be helpful, to know the self and the other. But to know the other, we need to be able to connect to it on a personal level. Education as an institution, it turns out, has a unique ability to do so. In the center of rural Japan lies the village of Hiraya, which I stumbled upon on my exchange in the country. It's home to 320 people, most of whom elderly, and hosts an elementary school of 20 students. The school is on the verge of losing its accreditation because it doesn't have enough students. If the school dies, so does the village. But the local Board of Education has not given up hope. Made of people who left Tokyo Glamour to pursue their love for working with young people, it runs the child care center and the school and allows students to come together in clubs, competitions, fairs. One of the most impactful of their works is working with locals. They get students to help out with making local delicacies, such as gohei mochi, or plants and fruit and grains. They attend lectures by local representatives that teach them about the history and traditions of the village. The impact of these initiatives is twofold. On the one hand, in addition to getting social skills that they need for social functioning, those students are also gaining life skills, such as cooking, keeping a garden, cleaning. On the other hand, they're engaging with the locals and giving them life, purpose, support. In that way, they keep their lives and legacies and ensure that they carry much further than our human mortality. Here we go. So I wasn't that far off from the truth. So what makes for an education that decides whether we are successful human beings? An education that addresses the gaps, which takes the student to the material. It breaches the gap between student and world, between generations, purposes, intentions, and consequences. It's an education that makes us notice the gaps in our daily lives and correct them. It's an education that breeds vessels for change. Because a student that goes through these experiences is one that notices the copious amounts of trash around their building. They ask why. They research who's responsible. They learn about recycling. They learn how to produce less trash so they don't strain the system and the planet. They try to inspire others. They structure a proposal and pilot a project at school, which turns to a neighborhood initiative, a regional norm, a country policy. Okay, Maria, well, that's very nice, but how do we put it into practice? That's the crux of it all, isn't it? How do we account for the lack of infrastructure, the small pool of teachers, the overcrowding in big cities and underpopulation of rural areas? How do we ensure equal quality? The way I see it is we start with a continuous, long-term, European-level framework, which sees holistic education become the standard across the Union. Continuous in education means a commitment of over 50 years, which includes the re-education of teachers and a new form of teaching, the production of new materials, and the refurbishing of learning spaces. Naturally, that will begin with a re-evaluation process which checks what incremental changes lead to the highest increase of academic and social value. This is where collaboration can kick in because the tests can be done all over the Union in different, diverse contexts. The implementation of this system can be led by people who are already involved in a more holistic form of education, such as the Finnish system or the IB educational system. The type of holistic education from the ones I lined up for you today depends on the age and circumstance that the school would have to face in order to apply them. I find that the Japanese close to nature, close to people approach is better used for primary schools and kindergartens. The story-like textbooks can be applied for primary to middle school because that would allow us for students to build those networks of dependencies I talked about. Once those dependencies are built, those students are well able to transition to a high school model, which is more student agency-based and produces researchers independent, ready for university. To have that system work, we need propellers of it. We need people in education who don't see it as a consolation prize, but as a passion. Teaching is a vocational discipline as much as medicine is. Teachers don't take or save lives immediately, they do it in the long run. And we need them in the long run, wholeheartedly. This means that we need to raise requirements for educational programs, but also ensure that educators get the right compensation. Not just money-wise, but setting-wise, job opportunity-wise, autonomy-wise. How? By providing them with continuous education and Erasmus mobilities that allow them to learn and practice in different contexts. Why autonomy? Because every day, every class, every student is different. And the rigid system which says all schools in the country study endothermic and exothermic reactions in chemistry does not account for hyperactivity, post-lunch sleepiness, disturbing or inspiring world events, which can guide the lesson plan. Also, if we need students to be taking ownership of the process, we need teachers to be more mentors than lecturers, and that requires flexibility. How do we ensure quality? If we're doing the same thing, tests, working groups, adjustments, but if we've done the proper work with the people that enter the system, and the system itself nurtures this sort of curiosity to knowledge, justice, and camaraderie in students, then I think quality will largely take care of itself. But it would take time. I can't offer you a magic bean solution. Not really. All I have here is a healthy seed that holds in itself the situations and people I met on my educational journey, through strife, through choice, through chance. A healthy seed, which once shared with you today, with commitment and care, will blossom like Mary's secret garden and will lead to a school system good and available to more students. And someone can ask me, well, aren't we a little bit too late? And I'll tell them, the best time to start planting a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today with you. Thank you, everyone.